This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts on the Wire, Episode 8. Anuj, Adhiya. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Episode 8 of Experts on the Wire. This is where we share digital marketing insights from the smartest minds online. Today's episode, I think, is an extremely special one. We have the Director of Engagement and Analytics at GrowthHackers.com, Anuj, Adhiya, to share lots of insights with you, specifically around what growth hacking really is and what it isn't. And I really enjoyed his definition. I haven't quite heard somebody define growth hacking in the way that Anuj did, and also with the clarity that he defined it. So pay attention to that when it comes up. He's going to talk about the hook model and the metrics that GrowthHackers.com actually uses to optimize for their growth and success. Before we get to that discussion, just a few quick notes. We got another review in the iTunes store, which I wanted to read and share with you. Because it does kind of flatter me a little, but also I want to share these things with the community. So it's by username Timbo Slice. I'm not exactly sure who this is, to be honest, but I have a pretty good guess. Anyways, it says, favorite new podcast, 5 stars. And he goes on to say, I'm usually hesitant to start dedicating time to new podcasts, but having followed Dan's previous work, I knew I had to listen. Each episode I've come away with something new or a way of thinking about a topic. Dan has a knack for bringing out the best info from experts he interviews. Awesome stuff. Keep them coming. Thank you so much, Timbo Slice. So as I always say, I'm encouraging reviews. We're into 8 episodes now. So if you found the show of value, definitely please consider taking a moment to leave us a review in the iTunes store. And this review really kind of ties nicely into something I just wanted to talk about for a second before we begin our interview. And that is really the purpose of this show. Now, when I started the show, I knew I wanted to bring in experts, and I knew I wanted to do a podcast format and kind of interview people, but I didn't feel like I had much more of a concrete or clear picture in mind of the value that this show is going to bring and what it is compared to other podcasts out there. Now, there's this kind of trend coming up lately, and I've seen it creep into kind of the marketing world, the marketing and business podcasts, people going this Radio Lab, storytelling, TED Radio Hour, Freakonomics kind of route with things. And while I love that format, I listen to those types of podcasts myself all the time. This is not a storytelling or even really highly inspirational podcast. I know that sounds kind of weird, but let me explain what I mean. So this podcast might happen to inspire you as kind of a byproduct, but my goal in the way that I communicate with the world is teaching. I really enjoy helping people break down what can be kind of elusive or complicated concepts or tactics or strategies in a way that you can feel like you leave the show and you say, oh, okay, I understand that now in a way that maybe I didn't before, or I get that, or I hadn't thought about that idea before. And my idea is to bring in experts that have actually done these things in the trenches. They're practitioners, and they're teaching the things that they know and do based upon their experience. This is not theory or philosophical stuff. This is actual things that marketers have done, talking about the topic of their expertise. And like I said, this is not a podcast that's meant to, use gimmicks or storytell or anything like that. It's really just meant to teach you, if you're a practitioner yourself and you want to apply these things, or if you're the business owner or person making the decisions that kind of requires the knowledge that you're learning from these podcasts. Either way, that's the goal and the purpose of this podcast. And I do see a lot of other marketing podcasts out there that do attempt to teach, but they don't break things down in the detail that I like. They don't make things clear necessarily or digestible. And this podcast really aims to do just that. So you can say, okay, what's the one marketing podcast I want to go to where I feel like I'm really going to learn something and take that away and be able to apply it to my situation? If so, if that's the marketing podcast you're looking for, I hope this is the one for you. So with that said, I think this interview with Anuj really fits, hopefully, that goal, because he breaks things down about growth hacking and metrics and business growth in a way that I think is very unique and very clear. And I think you're going to leave this episode feeling like you know a little bit more about growth hacking and maybe how to apply that to your business or your website. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Anuj Adhiya as much as I did. Why don't we jump right in, Anuj, and give the listeners some quick background on yourself?
Sure. So I am the Director of Engagement and Analytics at GrowthHackers. What that means is I run everything to do with the GrowthHackers community. And alongside that, I'm also part of our growth team for GrowthHackers. And that's where the analytics part comes in, is where whatever we run on the community, I analyze those experiments for what worked, what didn't, and alongside our head of growth make decisions about what to implement, what to optimize, things of that nature.
Excellent. Give us a quick background on growthhackers.com. It's a .com, right?
Yep.
Growth Hackers, because I always just type G and it pops up in my browser because I visit it quite often. Give us some background on that, because there's some listeners that might not be in the growth hacking world per se.
Sure. So Growth Hackers was a community founded by Sean Ellis, who by some is considered to be the godfather of growth hacking. He coined the phrase growth hacking. And he started it out as a place just for marketers, to nerd out about marketing, because at that time, or at least he felt that marketers are, toiling in obscurity, doing all of this great stuff, but there was no place to really talk about what, was going on and get ideas and be inspired by each other. And so that's how it came about. And this was sometime towards the end of September 2013. And so that was one of the primary objectives, was let's just talk about this sort of stuff. Let's get inspired by each other about things we're trying out, things we're finding out. But also as a consequence, all of us would then also have a chance to build our individual brands, amongst not only our peers, but other people who were interested in the topic as well. So, so if you're interested or think this is something of interest to you, certainly, Growth Hackers is the place to be.
So what is growth hacking exactly? I know a lot of the listeners know it. They hear it all the time now. What defines a growth hacker versus somebody that might not be a growth hacker? Where do we draw that line, and what is it?
Right. So this, I think, is still continually being debated. But I think one thing that you could say pretty much stands true is that growth hacking, I think, unlike what the name might imply, is not about tactics. It's really about strategy and process. And it's about a sustainable way of trying to grow whatever it is that you are trying to grow. So it's not as much about, hey, I saw Dropbox, do this referral thing where, I get space and you get space if you use my referral link. It's more about why did that work? And trying to figure out what are those things across the entire funnel of activities that you could engage in, from acquiring users all the way through them using your product and them talking about your product, the famous R funnel for all of your listeners, and trying to figure out through each of those stages, what are those things that will ultimately make your product sticky to whoever is going to use it. And that requires sort of a great deal of sort of system level or holistic thinking rather than this individual, I'm going to try this and I'm going to try that sort of thinking. So there's a lot of process behind this. And there's this mindset of constant experimentation to constantly discover those things that will eventually make your users say, yes, this is it, I want to use it. And while at the same time, you get the win out of them getting the win off the product as well.
Is growth hacking, do you think, very closely tied into Silicon Valley and startups and that whole culture? Or could we apply growth hacking to any type of business or website nowadays?
Yes. So I think Silicon Valley certainly does not have the monopoly on growth hacking. I think, so I'll speak to you from my background. My background is not even in marketing. I come from a pure science background, right? But the one thing that the pure sciences teach you is holistic thinking, is that when you touch something at one end, that has an impact on something else and maybe on many something else's. And it's trying to keep the entire picture and framework, in mind when you try to do anything. So that could apply to everything from, an app. It could apply to, planning a road trip. It doesn't necessarily, have to do with software and tech. Because it literally is about the process and, impact, about what you're trying to do and the end result, but trying to do it in a way that when you try something out and something works, that something is something sustainable versus this quick spike and a quick hit, right? So an example of that might be, the stereotypical tech crunch bump that startups seem to look for. That's a tactic. That's something you're going to get, and that's going to go away. But doing something like maybe something specific you do on Twitter on an ongoing basis that constantly generates, new users that then not only come to your product, but then ultimately stay, is something that's more in the realm of growth hacking in terms of being sustainable versus, that one thing that happened once and you feel good about it.
Would you say it's a requirement nowadays for any type of business, especially those online, even e-commerce shops or B2B, to know what growth hacking is and be employing, quote, growth hacking consciously in their business? Or if they're just marketing in a way that they believe is quality, is that enough? Or does everyone need to proactively be saying, I need to do growth hacking in my business?
So I suspect some people might already have been doing growth hacking without consciously, thinking about it. And I think it comes back to the sustainability of the actions that you've been taking. And I think there's also perhaps a divide in some cases where the traditional definition of marketing has maybe been focused more on the acquisition of users rather than the entire experience of the users, which is where growth hacking resides.
So the word growth is sort of, and this is my take on it, it could be slightly misleading because growth is talking about growing, whether it's users or top line or bottom line, right? It's kind of implying that acquisition.
Right.
What you're saying is growth is really about the retention and sustainability of the business as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think perhaps the controversy around the term was maybe intentional, just to get people talking about it. And I think a lot of people have problems with the term. Some people might term it growth engineering. We even had like a discussion on Growth Hackers a while back as to how would you describe it in 3 words if you had to, right? And it's perhaps one of the most popular ones was experiment-driven marketing. Another popular one, I think, was creatively iterated growth. Right. So, right. So it's not, but all of that. So I think the controversy comes around more the hacking part, because it implies just do whatever it takes and
Tinkering.
get it done. You're right. Versus it being a more sort of holistic view of the process.
Interesting. So you run growth for growth hacking, and we talked about this when we met. So does that bring a lot of pressure that you have to bring positive growth results to growthhackers.com?
Yes. So, and I'll say this just because I am on the growth team, and we do have a head of growth.
Okay, so you don't run it. I misspoke.
Right, but yes, there is constant pressure to not only grow it, but we're also pretty cognizant of the fact that ultimately we can't just care about, top line growth all the time. So we always have an area of focus based on, what we think will have the most impact. Now, there are times when we care more about retention than anything else. And in fact, off late, our focus has been more on week one retention, not just retention in general, because ultimately that's what has a big knock-on effect on midterm and long-term retention. And so while there's always some activity going on in terms of, yes, how do we fill the top of the funnel, right? This is a clear area of focus because, again, once we get people here, we've got to get them to stay, right? So, how do we deliver that magic moment? Are we delivering it better than we used to? Why are people not coming back even though we think we're doing better? And there's constant experimentation around there.
So I'm glad you brought up some metrics, because I definitely wanted to get into some specific metrics when it comes to what are you measuring? And you mentioned a few. So the one that really piqued my interest was retention week one.
Right.
Was this a metric that revealed itself to you as being like, okay, if we can get somebody to stick around for 1 week, they're more likely to stay longer term? What was the impetus of that idea there?
Well, so there's always been no secret about the fact that the quicker somebody sees the value in whatever it is you're offering, the more likely they're going to come back. And I think David Skoke, who's Boston-based, has this amazing post about revealing the time to wow, right? And in GrowthHackers' case, a lot of the value is around not only how well curated the content is, but the discussions around that content, and then the relevancy to whoever shows up. Right. But at the same time, this is a community that's constantly, refreshing the content, and there's just new stuff hitting people all the time. So it can be pretty dense, in terms of just trying to make your way through, what do I do here and what do I do first? So it was more a sort of a narrowing of our focus from, let's figure out how to retain certain kinds of people. And that's how it started out as, and let me take one more step back. It started out as just a pure analysis of, okay, how many people, just broad numbers of how many people are coming through the door and how many people are staying, and whoever's staying, how long are they staying? And that's what ultimately brought us down to the conclusion of, okay, we need to be doing a much better job right up front, because while we do have people staying, there are not as many as maybe we'd want them to stay. And even if they are staying, are they doing the kinds of things we want them to be doing? Right. So it was maybe a few months of us continually looking at the numbers and refining that hypothesis of where the area of focus really should be, starting just from pure, simple, broad numbers of, what was at the top and what was at the bottom. Right. And once we came down to week one, we found out that, unlike super users like me, who are there pretty much all the time, it may not be the case of it needs to be a daily thing for everybody. So it came down to a very simple idea of, if you registered, do you come back in the first week or not? And at that point of registering, do we have any predictors or indicators of whether you will come back in the first week or not? And those indicators, could be anything from, did you leave a comment and is that why you came back? Or did you upvote something n number of times? Right? Or was it a submission? Was it following a topic or following a person? Right? So that's the process of just trying to figure out more granularly, that magic number, which some of your listeners might have heard about, that at some point Facebook figured out that if you had n number of friends, the likelihood of you sticking around were greater, or if you had, 20 followers on Twitter or something, you would, come back. So it's trying to figure out something similar in our case as to what are those initial level of actions that maybe predict your long-term retention.
Now, what tools are you using to measure this? Or, I mean, not all of this can be with Google Analytics, I assume. You must be using...
Yeah, certainly not, right? So no surprise that Google Analytics does not give you user-level behavior, right? So we use Kissmetrics for all of this. And it's really not that much more complicated than right now, just given like the intense power, of Kissmetrics. Now, certainly there's, maybe some Excel level manipulation after the fact, but it's pretty much that at this point.
And I just want to wrap up that kind of part of the discussion and say, what kind of things have you learned that maybe people that aren't running a community per se, but that they could still take away from this type of growth and retention and engagement analysis and optimization that you're doing? Let's say they're running an e-commerce store or a blog, or, is there any learnings from a site like GrowthHackers that could be applied to other scenarios?
I think one thing that certainly stands out is a lot of this does not have to be complicated, right? So some of it is fairly obvious with even basic funnel analysis from Google Analytics, even if you weren't, going down, to the user level, right? Because whenever you have a product or a site, you always have to have a hypothesis of how you want people to behave, right? What's that ideal outcome, right, that you want out of here? And that outcome may be, you business focused in terms of, need to have N number of sales, or it could be and perhaps should be user focused, right? What is the value that the user gets out of this? And, there's got to be some way of measuring that value. It may be quantitative, it may be qualitative, it may be both. But there's always got to be a way to tell if that value has been received.
And some businesses even have the challenge of sometimes, in my observation, not knowing how to define that in the first place.
Right. So you've always got to have that starting point, right? Is what do I want people to do? What's an outcome? Because without outcomes, you can't measure anything, right? And so that was, it's almost like this fundamental, right? So, outcomes are not people bought things. It's people bought 2 things for $20 on a Monday.
Specific.
Right? It's got to be extremely specific and measurable, right? And as part of that definition of an outcome, I think when you've got a good outcome when you can answer, so what, as a result of that outcome. And that perhaps gets you to the value that you're providing to your user.
So, for example, somebody bought something, so what?
Right. Does that mean they'll buy again? Does that mean they'll tell their friend? Does that mean they're going to, create an account? Will they give me their credit card info? Will they download my app? Right? Because that really is the difference between metrics, which are numbers, versus KPIs, which are supposed to be predictive numbers. Right? And that's where the so what, comes into play. Right? And so it's easier to define metrics. People bought 2 things, people came back, more people came back on Fridays. All of that is great. Right? But at some level, all of that should lead you to some hypothesis on, okay, what does all of this really mean? And once you get a so what, that automatically feeds into, if it means more people will create a user account, heck, there you go. That's your level. That's your place to start optimizing. Make it easier. Right.
So if we were to apply, because some of the listeners out there are going to be in my scenario, which is I also run an agency, a company that provides services. So lead generation is often, and a lot of my clients, you ask them what their goals are. We want to generate leads is what they say is their goal. But according to what you said, that's like saying we want them to buy something and it's not specific enough. So how could somebody trying to get leads to provide a service in a service industry, how can they make their goal more specific?
Well, so maybe perhaps if it's just generating leads, maybe first you need a hypothesis about where are these leads going to come from, right? Are they going to, be people doing, searches on Google? Are they from social media? at least start out with some hypothesis of where they're going to come from.
So we want to generate leads from, and fill in the blank, from
Right.
Google, from referrals, from social media, from content.
Right. And then there's some definition of what does a lead really mean to you? Does it mean that it's somebody who's ready to just have a conversation with you? Is it somebody who's willing to buy from you? What does it really mean? And that process will differ, I think, from business to business, and certainly B2C to B2B for sure, right? And it's again a process of defining. Even if I got somebody through the door, what do I want them to do, right? And how many of them are doing what I want them to do? Because if you even got one person to do that, you should be knocking down the door of that person and asking them, why did you do what you did?
Yeah.
Right. And then just make that easier.
Yeah. One thing you said a few minutes ago was that it doesn't have to be complicated. And that's when I was asking you about tools and you mentioned KISS metrics. Can you speak to that a little bit more, and about how businesses and people that run sites can clarify things a little to make things just simpler on themselves and not complicated? Like, what are some steps they can take to more easily define like the few things they should be really measuring? Right.
And clearly that's hard when you're first starting out, right? Or you've never done that sort of an exercise before. And so for me, it always helps to sort of reverse engineer the entire process. Is start from the outcome always, and make sure that outcome is measurable. Even if it's not, a KPI, as we discussed earlier, right? But just make it so specific that when it happens, it happened, right? And it's there in the data. There's no arguing, about it, right? And just start if you know what the outcome is, then clearly there's a series of steps that need to occur for that outcome, to be successful, right? So if it is an e-commerce site, okay, somebody got to my homepage, somebody clicked a product picked a category, from a menu, somebody selected a product, they added it to their cart, they checked out, they bought the product. I mean, it's a very simplistic process, but it works. Because if that simple series of steps doesn't work, right, then clearly you've got a problem somewhere, right? In step 1, step 2, somewhere. So even setting up that simple Google Analytics sort of funnel report, will immediately reveal to you, at least at a macro level, where your problem really might be.
That's really good advice. And just to mention for the listeners, a couple episodes from now, I'm not sure the exact number, this is number 8, maybe around 10 or 11, we're going to have Annie Cushing on here, who is at analytics.com, who I'm sure you've heard of, Anuj, and she is a wizard at analytics stuff. So for anybody that wants to pick up where you just left off, tune in for a few episodes from now for Annie Cushing for some analytics stuff. So this has been awesome so far. I want to just switch gears a little bit and ask you about something that was written about called the hook model.
Oh, yeah.
And what is the hook model, and should business owners be concerned with this?
So the hook model was a sort of a framework for engagement proposed by Nir Eyal, and he's even written a book on it. And quite frankly, I love the hook model. And it's basically sort of takes advantage of human behavior, in that we always respond to certain triggers, and internal motivations. And it tries to sort of, I shouldn't use the word exploit, but certainly leverage those motivations towards making users do more of what products and offerings want them to do. There's certainly, a level of concern in terms of, like I said, exploiting users and, this normal brain chemistry amongst users to, maybe make them addicted to your product, because this is certainly what casinos do, right? They exploit this certain human behavior of not knowing what the outcome is and making people repeat a certain action to their detriment at times, right?
Yep, it's I can think of a lot of things in society: soap operas, alcohol, cigarettes.
Certainly.
They go down the line. There's so many things that have elements of that.
Right.
But not to get too philosophical, at the same time, though, don't us as individuals have a certain level of control and choice over that? I mean, if I'm going to Growth Hackers, I'm kind of choosing to do that to an extent.
Yes. So you hit on, I think, one of the most important parts. You are choosing, right? That's an internal motivator. So, I can bombard you with as many ads and emails as I want, but if you don't care about Growth Hackers, you're not going to respond to anything else I really do for you. So really the challenge for most offerings is to make themselves into this habit, right? And not make themselves into a bad habit, but make themselves so the user themselves, feels the need, for this on their own. They don't need any prodding or prompting, to do something or come back, right? It's similar to, what you said, this is why, if you have a hobby, right? Nobody needs, and it's the piano. Nobody tells you to practice the piano. It's something, you just love doing, and you'll come on your own and practice it.
The thing I find about communities that's interesting, or social networks, for me anyways, is I find myself wanting to go back when I'm checking to see if somebody responded to me.
Right.
Another human being, even email.
Yep.
Oh, did that person write back to me that I was hoping to get this positive reaction from?
Right.
Or where is this debate? Where is that left off? Do you do things to work that into kind of this retention model, or does that just happen kind of naturally in a social setting?
Well, so I think yes and no, but we don't do it too much, to be honest. But I'll give you a prime example of us, putting this in action. Is there are many communities where, let's say, you submitted a link, right, and you get notified anytime somebody upvotes that link. Right? We don't do that, right? So it's literally a black box. And if you are so motivated, you're going to keep coming back, of your own volition to see, did I get any more upvotes? Who commented on this? So
there's not even an internal notice in Growth Hackers, like an alert. Nothing. You don't.
No. It's only when, let's say, your post starts to trend on Growth Hackers, or there's a comment that you start to get notifications. But until that point, there's almost a sense of mystery and suspense for some people, at least, as to, will I trend today? And maybe they didn't trend today, and that's sort of this trigger to say, okay, maybe I need to come back and submit something even better, and maybe that will trend, right?
Interesting. So just so the listeners take away from this correctly, would you say the hook model, is it more of a philosophy? Is it a strategy? Is it a tactic? I didn't quite catch what sort of area it fits into.
So I think it's all of the above, because it's certainly a framework. So it is certainly a strategy to employ, and each of the steps of the hook model lend themselves to very specific tactics, to bring people back and to perform the same actions again and again. I think the philosophy bit, goes back to the concern you raised up front, which is, always be thinking about the user, right? Don't just think about this from the perspective of, I'm going to get users to do more and more of just using the product, right? Because that doesn't really mean anything. Ultimately, what value are you providing back to the user by them doing the same thing again and again? And you've always got to balance those two experiences and wins out. So
what value do you deeply believe Growth Hackers is providing to the growth hacking and the marketing communities?
Oh, yeah. So I think it's without question possibly one of the best sources, if not the best source of, inspiration of things to try, to just sort of turbocharge your growth every day. And I'm going to steal this line from Morgan Brown, who basically said that ideas are the currency of growth. Right? And without ideas of things to keep trying out and experimenting on, you're never going to find those sort of big wins that ultimately lead, to those big hockey stick sort of things, in your analytics and charts. Just because of the nature of a community like this where people are constantly not only submitting content that they've discovered they think is great, but they're now more and more writing about the kinds of things more transparently that they're trying out, that then naturally lends itself to more discussion about, hey, did you try X? Did you try Y? And, I didn't quite understand Z, or why didn't you do something? Right. And that just leads to this richer experience of trying to figure out whether you even should or should not try something, because ultimately your context is very different from somebody else's. But without people talking about it, you have less to go on to figure out whether should I do this, should I not do this, should I just try it anyway.
So there's a lot of utility because these are actual marketers looking for, like you said, ideas, growth hacking strategies they can employ in their own situation. And this is now a place to go for people to discover that and discuss it amongst one another.
Certainly. And the second thing that happens as a byproduct of discussion is, just as a consequence of this, there's a lot of thought leadership even in comments that people leave. Mm-hmm. And just by doing that in a public forum, you get to build your own brand as a consequence of these discussions, right? Because it's very hard to have, very in-depth and knowledgeable conversations, about topics like marketing. I mean, it's not just about, hey, this was a great article, thanks for sharing. It's really information that people have learned from their own experiences that they're leaving behind here, that either help people who are trying to figure out what is this growth hacking thing, right? And because you're always going to have questions when you read something. So having this additional layer of information on top, is that value add for people trying to figure it out? And for people who have figured it out, they have more in-depth questions or commentary on observations from what they read, which helps the more experienced people in this field as well.
So that sharing of information from people with different levels of experience is very helpful.
Absolutely.
Too. Absolutely. So one thing that you've been doing is allowing people to meet the team during office hours via Skype. And I guess, where did this idea come from, and how is this an asset to Growth Hackers?
Yes. So it came from Skype conversations that I did with members when I just put up a request on the community for people to help out moderating Growth Hackers. And those conversations were so great in terms of people just wanting to give back to the community because they felt they were getting so much value. And those conversations almost always veered into, so why do you come back to Growth Hackers, and what do you not like about Growth Hackers? That I myself started getting ideas from these conversations, and I thought, hey, why not just expand this idea and make it more available to whoever wanted to chat with us?
If somebody wants to partake in one of these, do you announce it on Growth Hackers? Can they sign up? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, we tried it as an experiment, and we still haven't formalized it as a place, a link you can click on the site and do this. It's on the roadmap, but I can certainly share that link with you if you want to share that with your readers. We're more than happy to chat with anybody.
Absolutely. So one thing I wanted to ask about was, what are the top current challenges that growth hackers face right now? Anything that you're willing or able to speak to? I think it'd be very interesting for people to hear, because a lot of the listeners probably do visit Growth Hackers, and a lot of times you think, oh wow, this is great community, it's active, you're growthhackers.com, like what could be challenging for you? So speak to some actual challenges and problems that our growth hackers might be facing right now.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a couple of examples through the funnel. So one is, certainly acquisition is always a challenge for us. It's for people who've been around Growth Hackers, they know that Growth Hackers was ultimately built on the back of Twitter. Was one of our biggest sources of traffic, right? But just at a macro level, Twitter itself has become so noisy that it's getting harder and harder to reach people through that medium. And so we know that that's not something we can continue to rely on the way we used to. So it's a challenge to find something that can make up that shortfall and gap that we know is coming in pretty soon. And we're already seeing signs of that happening.
Yeah. Do you feel that, and I'm sensing this too, things are getting more diluted? People are maybe in private Slack groups more throughout the day and not paying attention to Twitter. They're in places like Snapchat now, all these places that are kind of semi-private or private in nature, and that attention is getting separated out from some of the public forums like Twitter. What are your general thoughts on that? Do you see the same things that I'm seeing as well?
Oh, absolutely. Right. But if anything, I think it may be making the case for more channels that are under our control, than something like Twitter, where, so once people discover it, and, flood it, you're pretty much fighting a losing battle. And that's going to be true, even of Snapchat. Like right now, it seems to be exploding with marketers, but, ultimately every marketer is going to be in there and it's not going to be working as well for you anymore. Right. Slack is an interesting thing, especially for a community like GrowthHackers, because we still haven't answered the question of, we already have a community. Why would we have a separate Slack community and split the interactions there, right? So it's certainly something that's discussed all the time internally.
Do you run into any particular challenges with mobile? Are users harder to retain and get to engage in a mobile device?
We haven't yet had that problem yet, because most of our users still visit us on desktop, which actually is a pretty good thing, because that tells us that at least they're more focused on the act. Now, we're not opposed to people, visiting GrowthHackers versus Facebook if they're bored, but it's certainly more of a desktop type activity, for us right now. But I can speak to another challenge. Mm-hmm. which is a really interesting one for us. And that's just in the general realm of retention. Right? And what we find is, we have these groups of people that are active for a while, and sometimes they drop off, and other people come and take their place at times. And we found out that in some cases, it really has to do with their job situation.
Yes.
Because it's when people are between jobs, suddenly they're more active. But now that they've got this new job, boom, it's gone. Right? And so it's a challenge to figure out, okay, what can we do to keep these people coming back at least semi-regularly, if not as regularly as they used to, versus just completely forgetting that we even existed. Right? And so that's...
I can speak to personally, something I just realized now is, and I don't know if you've looked at users in this fashion, I actually use GrowthHackers when I'm asking myself, what can I share on my networks on Twitter? So I'm using GrowthHackers as a community that's curated content for me already that I can then share with my audience. And so is that a type of user that GrowthHackers has considered or looked at?
Yes, and in fact, it's fair to say that a lot of people use GrowthHackers this way. And it's certainly the case that while that's okay, we would of course like people to engage more with the community than simply take from the community, which again is great. We're really happy people take, because that tells us that we're constantly delivering value. Right?
I just admitted guilt.
No. But it's on us, right? Because if that's the only value you see in the community, it's on us to figure out how can we deliver even more value that at some point you're compelled to interact with the community in a deeper fashion than you currently do.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. So just thinking where I want to take the conversation next for the last 5 or 10 minutes we have, I think what I really want to ask is, where do you see the next 3 to 5 to 10 years of growth hacking as sort of a strategy, mindset, industry, and a term, and also growth hackers?
I think it's fair to say that this idea of growth hacking as a sustainable, holistic way of marketing, a lot of people have compared it even to agile marketing. Is likely here to stay, right? And while it may be restricted to a few people right now, the bottom line remains that there are going to be newer products out there every day, newer services out there every day. They're all going to be competing for the same attention, right? So it's just going to get tougher and tougher, and you're not going to have a choice but to be very systematic about how you go about carving out your slice of attention or taking somebody else's slice of attention, right? You can't rely on this ad hoc process or this cool shiny new thing you saw, right? And that in itself, again, is not restricted just to products and offerings. Even if you're an agency person, like you said, looking to get leads, everybody's looking to get leads. If you're just a guy doing search engine marketing, all you're doing is experimenting with ads all day long, right? Everybody's doing that, right? So it's not really about the ads anymore. It's about how are you going about this process that is giving you the quickest learning so that you have this advantage of knowing something before somebody else does and exploiting that for the time that you have, because that advantage is not going to last forever. So it's about maximizing how long you have it for.
Interesting. So let's ideate just for a second here. And this would be fun for me. So this podcast is not officially launched as of this recording right now. How could one growth hack a podcast? What are some, because it's a different medium entirely. It's audio. I'm on the iTunes store. I mean, it is based upon a website, but to your knowledge, what are some growth hacks or ways to think about that for a podcast?
So I think there's a couple things right off the bat, right? I think one thing is you're going to submit this to Product Hunt, right? At some point, because they now have a podcast vertical for you to submit individual episodes, right? And Product Hunt has an audience that's looking for podcasts.
So actually, that's one. I had no idea. I'm not a Product Hunt user, and the name implies that it's for products. So you can submit non-products to Product Hunt?
Yes. So and they have a podcast vertical, which you could pretty easily, I think, submit stuff to there, or at least have somebody submit it to, because they have their own process.
Yeah, how is that community? Are they friendly? Is it kosher to submit your own thing, or is it more like other communities like Reddit? Like you shouldn't be submitting your own stuff.
Oh no, it is, but they work slightly differently in that there are few people who have the ability to actually submit content that shows up on Product Hunt, unlike a GrowthHackers where it's pretty much free for anybody to submit content. So they've focused a lot on just curating what people see up front. So, and there's plenty of articles, even books on how to go about this entire process of approaching somebody to maybe get this on Product Hunt. So that's potentially one way to do it. I mean, I think since this is a marketing/growth related podcast, I would assume any community like GrowthHackers or Inbound would be interested in this content, right? So those are certainly pure traffic drivers, and I think if you just searched on Inbound or GrowthHackers, there's probably some definitive guides, on promoting podcasts that will take all the guesswork out of the process for you.
That's true. Maybe I should write a guide like that after 6-12 months of experience of totally. Promoting this podcast.
Right. And in fact, maybe you could take a leaf out of, I think it was Brian Dean, right? Who had the whole skyscraper method, right?
Yes.
Where you read somebody's definitive guide and you make it into the ultimate definitive guide. Right.
It's really funny you mentioned that, because he was on the 3rd episode, and I told him on that episode, I've had more people mention the skyscraper technique to me just randomly. And the point is how good of a job he did at branding that technique. I've had leads have mentioned that, people like yourself just randomly. So that was funny. One last question. This is kind of more of a fun one. So you're into martial arts, is that correct?
Well, yes, I used to be. more. I'm not an active practitioner anymore.
But at one time,
yes,
you were. So is that something, did that help you with being an entrepreneur at all? Or did you take any lessons from that and bring it into growth or business or working online?
Yes, so that's a very interesting question. And I think one of the secrets I learned about martial arts is that martial arts is not about teaching you how to fight. Right? It's more about controlling the situation. Right? So, and more so that you don't have to get into a fight. And a lot of that has to do with understanding your opponent. It's not about beating them into submission. Right? So if you understand their motivation for wanting to fight you, you can avoid that fight completely, and both of you walk away winners.
So an example is maybe somebody is showing off. They want to show that they're stronger and more powerful.
Right. And, you don't know at that point, they may be stronger and more powerful than you. You don't know that, right? And so, it's the greatest odds of success are when nobody gets into a fight and you don't have to find out if that person really is stronger than you or not.
Yeah. And I know, personally speaking, I would rather not find out. I usually choose the flight option in the fight or flight scenario.
Right. And that may be something you have to do. Right? Yep. But I think certainly trying to either understand why this is happening, right, and diffuse the situation before it gets more extreme than you want it to, I thought for me was one of those aha moments. And the other sort of thing it teaches you is that as you learn martial arts, you learn a lot of humility. And I had humility literally drilled into me because, I used to think every now and then, okay, now I've got this, right? Now I understand how to do this. And every time, my teacher saw this, he just put a beat down on me, which just told me how easy he was really going, on me. And it took a few beatings, but, I finally got the message that, okay, just keep learning and, understand that there may always be somebody better than you, but it's really about the process of learning more than anything else. And in fact, there's a couple of great sayings that, he taught me, which, have come from other people. And one of the most famous ones comes from, Bruce Lee. And he did a famous interview on this about learning, which is that if, when somebody comes to you and says, I want to learn, they have to be open to learning. Right? And so he demonstrated this by the concept of a cup that was full of water. And he said, if you come to me as a cup full of water, I can't pour anything into this cup. Right? So you need to empty your cup before you can learn anything and for me to be able to pour something into this cup. So that's something I take, I've taken with me, everywhere is I've always tried to empty my cup, and learn as much as I can because otherwise I won't. And the second aspect of this is a very simple little saying that says, absorb what is useful. Right? Because you come to a community like GrowthHackers, you're on the internet, you're listening to all these podcasts, there's just so much coming at you, right? You're not going to be able to retain everything, right? So always be aware of, like what's going to be most useful to me and just stick with that. Like don't get caught up in this, I need to know everything because it's always going to be there. So what's useful to you at that moment is what's more important, and just stick with that and you won't have any of this stress.
I love that. And I love those philosophies. I came from a music background and it's not martial arts, but I think learning and partaking and having experience with things outside of marketing, especially physical activities, can help impart a philosophy and a mindset and a way of looking at the world that are helpful in other industries and in marketing and things like that. So the thing with the Bruce Lee and the cup, that's kind of what I might call in my mind the beginner's mind.
Right.
Always trying to look at things from the eyes of a beginner. And so if we can apply that tactically just for a moment to marketing, let's say, for instance, so I do mostly SEO, search engine optimization. So for me, that might be, and maybe you have your own example, but for me, that might be looking at Google search results, trying to have a clean slate, a blank mind, and trying to put aside any things that I think I know about how Google is working and look at things just from a fresh point of view. And that's one example I can think of.
Oh, completely, right? And this in fact translates so well to what we're trying to do right now with our focus on week one retention, right? Is everybody who's trying to, figure this out internally on our team are growth hackers super users. So when we look at, growth hackers, the first thing you see, we've already figured things out and we know exactly where to focus on. But what does a new user really focus on, right? And so absolutely, that blank slate beginners, I don't know anything mindset, I think is extremely valuable to have. And I'd actually add on a couple, one more mindset, which I stole from the movie Philadelphia, which is whenever somebody's saying something to Denzel Washington's character, he says, tell it to me like I'm a 6-year-old. Right? So you've really got to simplify stuff down beyond what you think is simple.
Yes.
Right? So it's not only that beginner mindset, but literally, can I explain this to my 6-year-old?
Yeah, that sort of touches that. Now we're getting a little bit into the cursive knowledge territory. Right. With, I think, in the book Made to Stick. Yeah, when you know a topic so well, you don't know how to explain it in a simple way.
Right.
And I think that's such an important point as well. So, Anuj, this has been a fantastic. I'm so psyched to publish this episode, hopefully in about like 3 or 4 weeks or so, because once it launches, we're going to do 2 per week. I'm just so psyched to get this out there. I think you've talked about lots of fascinating and useful and interesting things. Before we go, is there any place you would like users to go on the web besides Growth Hackers, or any request of my listeners, or anything that would be helpful for you or Growth Hackers for them to check out?
Well, I think just coming to Growth Hackers is great. I think, like I said, I'd certainly share the link with you for people if they want to have office hours with us. We're more than happy to, discuss anything or drink virtual coffee with people. We do that. If anybody in your audience is part of a growth team or is actively managing a growth process, we've got this projects tool that's currently in private beta, should be out soon, but there is a beta sign up page for it at projects.growthhackers.com for anybody who's interested. And certainly if there are any questions about Growth Hackers, growth hacking projects, anything like that, you can certainly reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Anuj Adhiya.
And can you spell that quickly?
Yeah, it's ANUJADHIYA.
Great. So it's just your name, and we'll have it in the show notes as well, so people can find it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Anuj, this has been so much fun, and I do hope to get to hang out with you again in person sometime, especially given we're so geographically close to one another. And you're going to be at the same concert I'm going to be at.
Yes, I am.
That's funny. So I'll wait, and we're not going to be too far in sections, so I'll wave to you. Totally. Are you a big Sting and who is it? Sting and
Gabriel.
Peter, yeah. You're a big fan of theirs?
Oh, totally. And I think Peter Gabriel alone, is such a treat, and his shows have been so mind-blowing that I can't wait for this show.
Excellent. I'm excited. I mean, I'm going to admit it's mainly my wife and her mother who are fans of them, but I'm a musician, like I said, so I think I'm going to enjoy it as well. So
yeah, I love it.
Awesome. So I'll wave to you. So excellent. Thanks everyone for joining us for episode 8 of Digital Marketing Experts on the Wire. This has been tons of fun. Definitely stay tuned for episode 9, which I don't know who that's going to be because it's not right in front of me, but I'll say that in the outro when I record that. And definitely, if you've liked or enjoyed any of these episodes, please leave us a review in iTunes. I would greatly appreciate it. Even if it's to say you hate the show or you love it, whatever it is, if you want to leave a review, in iTunes, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Anuj.
All right, thanks. Bye.